Reincarnation meeting in Seattle in November a year ago. 1, 2, 3. Okay.
Seattle, oh yeah.
Oh, okay.
It was memorable.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, November, yes.
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 All right. Well, so you remember Paul and I were there. Vaguely. Okay.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
She doesn't remember she was there, but
Oh,
she remembers she was there.
It's kind of like Woodstock. If you remember you were there, you weren't there, right?
I kept thinking camp, but no, Seattle.
All right. Well, we're talking about Bardo today. Bardo. So we all meet here on a Sunday morning to talk about death. Well, to me, that's one of the most interesting topics that you could talk about. And K.H. apparently feels the same way. He said in the Mahatma letters, if you would have the keys to the understanding of life, you must have the keys to understanding death. Kind of an intriguing comment there. If you want to understand life, then you need to understand death. And that makes perfect sense to me. We talk about, well, Maury was pointing out the constitution of man here, the fact that it was missing the etheric level. But we know, as Theosophists, you've all studied it, the constitution of the human being. That, and this is one of the great gifts that Theosophy has given to the world. This understanding that there's far more than just matter, for one thing. And even the religious people who talk about spirit and soul and matter, still anything that is not matter or not the physical body is kind of just out there somewhere. But through the reiteration of the ancient wisdom teachings, we have something a little more tangible, at least to some extent, that we can hook onto and get a little better comprehension of what we are as human beings. So, we Theosophists, having studied and meditated and contemplated, have at least some idea that this is just temporary here, and that there is far more than meets the eye, and that we can actually contact it. It's not just something that after death we hopefully will attain, but we can actually make some progress towards attaining communication with our higher self to a much greater extent while we were here in this physical form. Obviously, we know it's not going to last forever. I don't know anyone who still has the same physical body that they had 300 years ago. Anyone else here? Actually, when you put things in perspective, think about, I love to think about, just come up with ideas, what if, but think about 100 years after you die. You know, you may live 50, 60 more years, I don't know. But go 100 years beyond that. What will be your legacy? Do you think there will be people who will be still talking about you on a daily basis, or even maybe once in a while? Your children will be gone, your grandchildren will probably be gone. Anyone that you knew personally will probably not even be alive at that point. So what is important? And I look at it today. Okay, so what is it, what can I do today that is going to be important in the future, 150 years from now, let's say? I want to work on things that are important. I'm not very concerned about what's on TV right now or what football game is being played in what city or any of that. I want to know stuff that's important. So to me, life and death are important. When I was a kid, I was fascinated because I grew up on a ranch in northern Arizona. The closest town was 5 miles away, and it was tiny. And it was a Mormon town. 90% of the people that lived in that town, it was actually founded by people sent out by Brigham Young, including, not the first, but the second wave of people included my great-great-grandfather. In this town, everybody, of course, talked about politics and religion and football and baseball and everything else. And when I was a kid, I thought, okay, well, that's, yeah, kind of interesting, but you know what intrigued me? When someone in town died, and it was a small town, the school would usually shut down for that afternoon so that everyone could attend the funeral. And I had the option of going or not going. I would always choose to go, because I was fascinated that for 1 hour, people actually talked about things that were serious, and that they were actually focused on the meaning of life. Whereas most of the time, it was just food and games and silliness to me. And I'm a kid. So I've always been fascinated. I somehow knew that there was something that you can understand about that has a spiritual meaning about life. So he who holds the keys to the secret of death must also be possessed of the keys of life. So in Theosophy, we know that we consider the personality the lower part of this, physical, including the etheric, and the prana, which animates it, the astral, or our emotions, and the lower manas, constitutes our personality. And then at the higher manas is where the level of our causal body, or I call it our soul. I don't use the word ego anymore, or ego, however you want to pronounce it. It has, Theosophists have held on to that term for the longest time, but I think at some point we just have to let go of it, because it's been used too many different ways and it's too confusing to new people. So I just call it the soul, or the higher self, and reserve the term ego for the psychological term of actually this identity of this physical body, my emotions, my thoughts. That's me. That's what most people think of as the ego. Higher than that is the intuition, the buddhi. And above that, anything is pretty much speculative. If you can reach that height, you're beyond the human kingdom. So speaking of that, what is our goal as humans? Anybody have an idea? What's your goal as a human? Yella?
To understand.
Go ahead.
To understand.
Understand what?
Maybe the purpose of life.
Ah, okay. Figure out how life works. That's what I call it. I say an ant is trying to figure out how life works. Maureen was telling us a story about ants this morning. Every creature, whether it's a plant, an animal, even a rock, they're trying to figure out how life works. These are bits of consciousness at whatever level. Even the solar logos is still trying to figure out how life works. It kind of blows your mind, doesn't it, that a solar logos wouldn't know how life works, but they don't. They're still expanding in consciousness. So obviously they're still learning. So it doesn't matter how high you go up the ladder of consciousness, you're still trying to figure out how life works. So coming back, what again is our goal as humans? Well, I say it's to graduate. If you decide that you want to go to Harvard, is your goal just to be accepted as a student at Harvard? I hope not. I hope the real goal, that's only an intermediate goal. The real goal should be that you want a degree. You want to have graduated from Harvard. Is that right? Well, what's your goal in life? To gain understanding, yes, but in order to graduate to the next level of consciousness. And what is the next level of consciousness? What happens after we're humans? This consciousness has gone through mineral, plant, animals, human, and what's next? Superhuman, the adepts. Sometimes called the fifth kingdom. Scientists only recognize 3 kingdoms in nature and say that we humans are just glorified animals. Well, we in the occult sciences make that a separate distinction because there's a very definite difference in consciousness between animals and humans. Yes, we are wearing a type of animal body, but our consciousness is not the same. And we have a personal individual soul, which animals don't have. So there's a very distinct difference between humans and animals. So we say there are 4 kingdoms in nature physically, but we also say that those continue on. So the next higher one among those would be the adepts. Now that doesn't mean that everyone who graduates from the human kingdom becomes an adept, but it does mean that the adepts are one representative of that kingdom or that level of consciousness. They choose purposely to come back to help us, teach us, and some of them, not all, but some of them choose to actually come back in physical form. There are no other bodies available for them to use except for the best human bodies that can be produced. So that's the best that they have available, and that's what they use. They're very practical. There is nothing in occultism that is not practical. It's more practical than physical science. Don't tell any physical scientist that. But it is absolutely practical, it's ethical, and it's logical. So our goal as humans really should be to graduate from the human kingdom. Why? Well, I'm hoping that some of us will be willing to do what the adepts do and come back and help teach others. It's an enormous sacrifice that they make, enormous. Okay, so here's your choice. You can either become a deva, an angel, or you can come back to this physical world, take on a heavy physical body, all of the requirements of caring for that body, and help people who don't really want to be helped. Which one would you choose? Well, fortunately, a few of them choose to come back, knowing that even if they can help a few people, that's good enough, because those people will spread out that influence to others, and it all filters out through the entire world. So KH often referred to their work as soldiers who volunteer for a forlorn hope. Soldiers who volunteer for a forlorn hope. Meaning that it's almost certain that it's going down in flames, but they do it anyway, because there's always that chance that someone may be helped by it. If you are a student of the history of the society like I am, you just kind of shake your head sometimes at the things that people do. You think ought to know better, and yet we Theosophists quarrel and disagree with each other as much as anybody else, and actually interfere with the process. If truth be known, we probably cause the adepts as much trouble as we help, despite our intentions. They probably view us as kind of unruly 3-year-old children sometimes. And trying to keep us in line cannot be an easy task. But they have volunteered for this forlorn hope, and hopefully some of us will do the same thing when we reach that state. Because the world certainly needs help. And we have that opportunity. All of nature works in cycles. We're just coming out of winter time now. Any day now, I think it'll be spring. Or do you have spring in? Yes, of course. I saw the blossoms already, so I know you have spring there.
It's called the rainy season, as is winter and fall.
Okay. Actually, yeah, in a lot of parts of the world, they only recognize 2 or sometimes 3 seasons. But for the most part, there are 4 cycles to 4 parts of any cycle. So what are some of the major cycles? The yearly cycle. What else?
The cycle of life.
Cycle of life and in a lifetime. What else?
The moon cycle.
The moon cycle. Okay.
Daily cycle.
Daily cycle. Exactly. Exactly.
Crop cycle.
Crops. Mhm. Exactly. And what's distinctive about them? They all follow the same pattern. Always, invariably. So what is the pattern? Let's start with coming out of the deep sleep. Gradually gaining consciousness again. Then the second cycle is really getting up to speed. And so, well, in the morning, for example, you first wake up and you have to first of all remember who you are, what day of the week it is, what it is you have to accomplish today. So, and then by the time you have your coffee, then you're starting to get back up to speed again, right? Then you go to work, or if you work at home, you take up whatever project you left off before, whether it's reading, studying, writing, teaching, working at an office, whatever it is, and you go full bore. Now you have got up to speed now, and you're actually increasing your experience at that point. That's the true growth period of any cycle. And then you do that for a period of time until what? Until fatigue sets in.
And you get tired.
You get tired, and everything starts winding down.
Sleep cycle.
You lose energy, it starts waning. And you have the moon cycle. It's first brand new, it's coming out of the obscurity, and it is a waxing cycle. Then it's at the full moon, at its height. Then it becomes a waning moon, right? So every cycle is exactly the same, and it comes down, loses steam, loses brilliance, whatever, until it sinks again into obscurity or into unconsciousness. The very beginning of the secret doctrine talks about the beginning of a manvantara, coming out of the deep, deep sleep and reawakening and recreating the universes of whatever, depending on what level of manvantara we're talking about. Every cycle is exactly the same. Even a pendulum. The pendulum is at its full when it's at the bottom. When it swings up to one side, it has lost all of its energy. And then it swings back again, full energy again, and then it's losing as it goes up until it runs out of energy. So every cycle, it doesn't matter whether it's electricity, a pendulum, and it can be a nanosecond, or it can be trillions of years. Every cycle goes through those phases. So, let's talk about the life cycle that you mentioned. What is the life cycle? We generally think about birth up until the moment of death as being the life cycle, but it's not. It's not, because that isn't the end of the cycle, and we're not back to the starting point again, so that can't be the full cycle. the cycle, let's say that it starts at birth, let's say, and death is only 3/4 of the way through the cycle. And then there's a period that most people know virtually nothing about, which is called the Bardo. Bardo means, in Tibetan, the period from the moment of death of the physical body until the next incarnation in a new physical body. There's not even a word in Sanskrit that I'm aware of that connotes the same thing. So we are kind of stuck with Bardo as being the only term available that succinctly describes this idea of this period of time. So Bardo. In order to understand it, let's go through a little more precisely the part that we do know. When a baby is born, how conscious are they? Those of you who have been parents, you have a brand new baby that's
Not very.
they almost look dazed, kind of, don't they? I mean,
What?
they sleep as if they, what in the world? Where am I? Yes. There's a period of just complete, almost like shutting down and like, no, I don't want to be here. And they'll sleep hours and hours at a time, don't they? And it's only gradually that it comes a little more to life, and they're able to kind of focus on what's going on around them, and it's a long period of reawakening. I mean, think about it. This soul, this causal body has been sleeping for some period of time, maybe hundreds of years even. So coming into a new physical body is a rude awakening, so to speak. And it takes some getting used to. Just think about the concrete physical part of it, coming back into this physical body. This is one of the most difficult things of existence, I think, is just having to deal with the physical world. It is, when you go into deep meditation, don't you just kind of, everything fades away, and it's just a relief, isn't it, to kind of get away from that physicality for a while. Even sleep. People who go through very deep depressions sometimes say that their only respite is during the time of sleep, and that from the moment they awake until they fall asleep again, they just feel heaviness and just dread and anxiety and fear, and it's just this feeling of heaviness. And even if you have a really great attitude, it still wears on you. Being in the physical body is a stress in itself. And then we add more to it by living in stressful situations, in relationships, and in tightly packed communities, and interacting and expressing opinions and getting into fights and quarrels with people. So we actually increase that stress. Some people on purpose, some people just because they don't know any different. But it's stressful to be alive. And when we are able to be out of that, there's a calmness that prevails. So for a baby to sleep a lot, it makes a lot of sense, because it takes a long time to readjust to this physical world. But by the time they get to be 2 or 3 years old, they're really, what are they doing? They're getting back up to speed, aren't they? They're recapitulating. This is the recapitulation process. At that point, they're probably not learning a whole lot new that they haven't learned before. But they are getting back up to speed for this lifetime. For the humans, it takes quite a while. In fact, approximately 21 years to really get back up to a productive level, and even longer, because these periods of the phase of recapitulation and of new growth overlap considerably, many years. So there's even into the middle of your life, you're still in some cases recapitulating, and in some cases you're actually learning new stuff as a teenager. Obviously, technology was not around 200 years ago or 600 years ago, that in your last lifetime, whenever it was, that you are learning as a 12-year-old now. So they are already learning new stuff. So this crosses over. The recapitulation and the new learning have a very long crossover period. But there comes a time in your early adulthood when you really are increasing in your experience, in your life experience. And that's what life is all about. It's all about gaining experience. How else do we expand our consciousness? There is no other way. When I first learned about Theosophy, I was ecstatic. I thought, wow, now that I kind of understand what it's all about, all I have to figure out is how to get out of this cycle of life and death and move on to something else. And so my goal was pretty much escapism. It was to get out of it. I didn't care much for the everyday life, and I thought, good, I'll just kind of go meditate in a monastery somewhere and get away from it all. Well, that's not how life works. Life is about the experience. It is about the experience. And it took me a few years for that to sink in and to get that little aha moment where it's like, oh, now I understand. It's not about escaping from it, getting out of it. It's about making the most of it. Learning what you're supposed to learn. That's how you graduate from Harvard, isn't it? You have to learn the lessons as you go. It's not just about getting out of it as quickly as you can, but as getting as much out of it as you can. It's about applying yourself. So then we are really productive in our midlife, 45, 50, 55, 60, even 65, 70, 75. But at some point, our energy starts diminishing again. And then we get slower and slower. And eventually there comes a time when we're much more like the babies. And it's like, okay, I think I've had, I think that's about as much as I can take. And we sleep more, don't we? We take more naps and kind of check out, and the everyday affairs are less and less interesting, and meditating and reading and just kind of quiet time seems more and more important. And then eventually even that isn't good enough, and we start spending more time on higher levels of consciousness, purposely or unpurposely, or without even knowing it. And then, obviously, at some point, our energy winds down to a point that death occurs. So, there are many ways that people approach death. I would say probably the majority of people are kind of frightened of the prospect of death, regardless of what they say. I know a lot of people say, oh yeah, I'm not afraid of death, but then when it comes right down to it, you see the look in their eyes when they're confronted with it. And it's easy to say one thing, but then when it's right in front of you, then you're really caught. You're caught short, and it's like, oh my gosh, this really does happen. I remember a few years ago when a friend of mine died. I had known for months that he was dying and that he was ill. Still, when you get the phone call, I was very upset. Somebody said, but you knew about it for a long time. I said, but it's so final. It's so final. So no matter how you is, and it may not last but a few moments, but it's there. So I want to give a couple of examples, personal examples, of how people approach their own death. My mother died 8 years ago now. 7.5 years ago. No. 8 years ago. She had had cancer 7 years previous to that, and had the radiation and the surgery and all of that, and never had energy after that. And I would always encourage her to go walking a little bit. No, I just don't have the energy for that. You could tell that it had just really taken a toll. But she, was upbeat, and my father died a few years later, 4 years after that. And she still lived on the ranch where we grew up as kids, and I had 2 brothers in houses each, quarter of a mile away, so it wasn't like she didn't have people nearby, but she lived in her little house by herself and never wanted to be a burden. She always enjoyed living by herself, but she became very contemplative. She was a devout Mormon throughout her whole life, right up to the end. But I tell people she was one of the best Theosophists I ever met. She just didn't know it. She kept a diary for 60 years. Almost every single day wrote an entry in her diary. So if there were any disputes about what happened when we were kids, we go back to her diaries. And it's funny because she told me one time that she started keeping it because she and my dad would sometimes argue about when something happened or what exactly happened. And so she decided that she was going to start writing stuff down. Now you've got an idea.
It's very smart.
And she said, when he would say something and she knew it wasn't right, she'd say, "Here, let's look in the diary." And sure enough, she remembered because she wrote it. So later she would get to where she wrote 2 or 3 pages sometimes in her diary. It was more a journal at that point. But she became very contemplative, and I would call her every week, and we'd have great conversation, and go visit her 2 or 3 times a year. And she just became very mellow and just very in tune with life, I say. So one day she called and said that I knew that she had been not feeling well for a couple of weeks, and she went to the doctor, and they admitted her to the hospital and find out that the cancer had returned. She said, "I'm not doing anything this time. I'm just going to let it take its course." Fortunately, no one in the family tried to dissuade her. No one was selfish enough to try to talk her out of it. And we were very supportive, and we all met together. She was in a hospice facility for a while, and we all met there. And they had a big room where families could have like a family meeting room. I've never seen her that radiant. And we were all just kind of in awe. If you were the least bit sensitive, you could see the aura. Her eyes, I never realized how blue her eyes were, because she had kind of squinty eyes, but they were wide open, and she was just absolutely radiant and angelic in her persona. And everyone felt it. Even the nurses were kind of like, "What is going on here?" And we had a family meeting and spent the afternoon there, and within about 4 weeks after that, she died. But everything she was completely in tune with it. It was just as easy as it possibly could, except for a small amount of pain that she, had to deal with. There was no resistance on her part, and it was just as peaceful as it possibly could be. Then 2 years ago, my sister died. She was a twin. And both of them, although they weren't identical twins, they didn't hardly look like sisters, let alone twins. They never lived more than 90 miles apart from each other, never in their life. And in the later years, they both lived in Tucson, Arizona. But she just always had a rough life, always made the wrong choices, and just, I don't know, she really struggled with life. She didn't like to make an effort. She thought life should be a lot easier than it was. So she was kind of an escapist. She escaped through food, television, and reading. Those were the three things, her means of escape from life. And in the end, she had diabetes and several other, and heart problems, and several things going on. And she realized that she had pretty much messed up her family. She had 3 children, and they were all completely dependent on her. She never raised them to be independent. She wanted someone who would always love her, so she arranged it so that they would always be psychologically dependent on her. And she realized only later what a mistake she had made in doing that. So here she was, very poor health, poor family situation. None of them could ever keep a job. She was always having to, and it turned out we didn't find out till later, she had an addiction to shopping, QVC. Would buy stuff that she did not need at all and would never take it out of the box. And she wasn't working, it was her husband who was working. And she would manipulate all the credit cards to pay off one with the other, and she had racked up $60,000 in debt. He didn't know about it. So here, we, of course, on the surface could see part of it, but it was like an iceberg. We were just seeing the tip of it, and she knew all the rest that she wasn't sharing with anyone. So she had heart surgery. She had to have her foot amputated, and her health was just going down fairly rapidly, and she knew it. And so I went down to visit her that December and spent a few days with her, and she said, I know this is the last time I'll ever see you. And she didn't fully believe in reincarnation, but I think she might have been thinking about it, because what she actually said was, I know this is the last time I'll see you in this lifetime, when she left, when I left. But anyway, she got to the point where she was to be transported to a facility, to a hospice, and she was very anxious, and she was always one of these people that just would rail against everything. It shouldn't be like this. This is not right. She'd just get very angry about things. And so it got to where it was too difficult for her to be at home. They were going to take her to a hospice. They arranged the ambulance or the vehicle to transport her. So she got to the hospice, was on a stretcher, and when she got there, there had not been good communication between the transporters and the hospice. And so when she got there, there wasn't a room available. And the receptionist got all flustered because here was a patient coming in and there was nowhere for her to go. And my sister got very upset when she found out what was going on. She said, well, I guess I'll just die here in the hallway. And yeah, well, so they finally got her a room, and within 30 minutes she died. And it obviously was from a heart attack, and it obviously was brought on with this bout of anger that it was her normal mode of operation. So I describe these to contrast the two approaches. My mom, who just was completely at peace with everything. And she, for several years, at least 3 years, we could tell she was preparing. And this was long before she knew that the illness was bad. But she gave things away, and she was organizing her life. She would ask people. My aunt asked her later. She said, you know, she called me up a few weeks ago. She said, is there anything that I've ever done to offend you? And she says, heavens, no. Why would you ask? She says, well, I just want to make sure that everything's good. I don't want any loose ends here. So we knew that she was just checking everything in her life to make sure everything was in order, that she hadn't left anything undone, and she was completely ready. She said, I did the best I could with raising my kids. I took care of my husband until he passed, and that was a major goal of hers, was to be there while he went through his last illness. She said, I'm ready. I've done everything possible. And then my sister, who, you know, put up all the blinders so she wouldn't see the mess that she had created, was not ready at all. Not ready at all. So it was a very difficult process for her. So many ways of approaching death. Some are better than others, and as Theosophists, we should always be aware not only how it affects us, but everyone around us. The caregivers for a person, hospice workers are incredible. They are nurses and hospice workers in general. I just have the greatest respect for them. They know exactly which of these patients are ready and are in tune with the process, and which ones are resisting and fighting. And it does nothing but cause frustration and tension for everyone around them, the family, the caregivers. So I hope that we will all be ready at that point, and that it will be a very easy process. But the important thing is, because that affects the next process, which is Bardo. Now we're really getting into the Bardo session. So, what happens when we drop this physical body? Now, obviously, we know that there's no reason to keep the physical body, so we generally believe in cremation. And interestingly enough, even many religious people are being cremated more than ever before. So they're starting to get the message too. Our little Theosophical society has had a far bigger effect than some of us realize sometimes. In Nevada, for example, we have one of the highest cremation rates in the country. Only one state is higher than us, and that is Hawaii.
And you can understand why in both cases.
Yes, exactly.
Psychological.
Well, that's part of it, but there are lots of Asian influence in Hawaii.
Oh, okay, okay.
But in Las Vegas, it's because nobody was born there. They all came from somewhere else, so it's not like their family has to have a grave to go visit. So
I
that...
thought it might just be difficult to bury all those bodies in the desert.
Oh, no, we bury them in the desert all the time. That's the way, yeah. That's the mob started that.
And the coyote helped.
Yes. No, but no, interestingly enough, cremation is becoming more and more popular, and it does make a lot more sense. So we don't need to talk about that much, but then what does happen? What I have put together, and if you read, for example, John Aljo's book on basic theosophy, he tells you that there's a little bit of a problem, because we've got two differing viewpoints about what happens after death. We have one that came from Leadbeater and his investigations, and we have a very different one that came from the Mahatmas and from HPB. Now, the Mahatma letters were not published until 1924, after A.P. Sinnott died. So most of Leadbeater's books were written before that. And so only after all of the letters were published did it become evident that there were some conflicts between some of these. And without going too deeply into the differences, I would say just offhand that Leadbeaters are more in tune with what the spiritualists teach, whereas K.H. and Moria and H.P.B. had a quite different viewpoint, and I'm going to go with theirs because there are too many differences and I don't want to confuse people, so I feel better with their version. I've actually studied spiritualism quite in depth. I spent 7 years. I actually was a member of a spiritualist church there, gave lectures at their services, got quite involved with it just to see what was going on. I wanted to see, and I can tell you they got nothing of importance to share, but I learned a lot. Now I can speak with some authority when I talk about what they have or don't have. But I'm going with the masters, the adepts, and what they said about it. And this comes almost entirely from the Mahatma letters to A.P. Sin. So, according to their view, there are 2 main periods after death. And they emphasize that the first period is really not a conscious period. It is what they refer to as Kamaloka. Kama being desire, and that takes place at the astral level. Kamaloka. Loka means a place or a location. Our word location actually comes from the Sanskrit word loka. So Kamaloka is the realm of desire. So what happens in this Kamaloka? It is before I get into that, I missed one very important part. And that is the life review that happens when somebody dies. K.H. even says in the Mahatma letters, no man dies insane or unconscious. Regardless, even if that person is in a coma, even no matter what their mental state has been up until that point, he says, no man dies insane or unconscious. Even a madman will have his instant of perfect lucidity at the moment of death, although unable to say so to those present. He says, the last throbbing of his heart and the moment when the last spark of animal heat leaves the body, the brain thinks, and the higher self lives in these few brief seconds his whole life over again. So the life review, and it absolutely does take place. If you read any of the near-death experiences, that is one of the most profound experiences of this process of almost dying and coming back. And invariably they say that this life review takes place in a split second, and yet it covers everything from the first second of consciousness right up until the present moment. Every thought you thunk, every experience you had, it is more your reactions to it. It's your perceptions of it, because you're not looking at it objectively, but from how you saw it at the time, but also how you see it now at your present level of consciousness. So you're seeing it from 2 different points of view. How you perceived it at that time, and now you're kind of looking down at it and re-seeing it again from a different perspective. So it's very profound. It has a tremendous effect on the dying person. K.H. says, speak in whispers, ye who assist at a deathbed. find yourselves in the solemn presence of death, speak in whispers. Especially, keep quiet just after death has laid her hand upon the body. Very important. If you happen to be among those who are present when a person dies, even if you have to kind of suggest it to the others, please make that clear. It needs to be very quiet. There shouldn't be any wailing and emotional outbursts. If some of the family members are having trouble dealing with it, try to get them out of the room if possible. Keep it just as quiet as you possibly can, and preferably for even a few hours if possible. If you're in a place where the body doesn't have to be transported immediately, then it's best and it's okay to be with it, just as long as there are not any violent emotions going on. Just keep it as calm as possible for even a few hours if you can, before there has to be any disturbance of the physical body. This is very important to keep in mind, very practical information. So, no one dies insane. Everyone has that. And that really constitutes the primary focus of the after-death experience and your next incarnation. Your last thoughts are going to have an enormous influence on your next incarnation. But those last thoughts are affected by what you have done throughout your lifetime. If you've been very clear and had a very concise goal for several years and have been working towards it, guess what? Your final thoughts are going to be, oh great, in my next incarnation, this is what I want. That's going to be topmost in your mind. So if you have goals, and I hope you all have goals that go 2 and 3 and 4 lifetimes ahead of, not just a few decades, but I'm talking lifetimes. You need to set your goals really high. Let's have the goal of becoming a superhuman, of becoming an adept, or at least that state of consciousness where we can graduate from the human kingdom. I hope every Theosophist has that goal. So if that's your final thought, that you have made every possible effort towards that goal, in your next lifetime it's going to open up perfectly. Let's see. We've got a little time. There's so at the end of this lifetime, this is when we accumulate karma, is during this physical life. Karma does not normally accumulate after this lifetime, in the Bardo point. Because we are not a complete human being, we drop fairly rapidly of course the physical and the etheric are gone almost immediately. Once the life force leaves, then that is gone. Physical body dies, and you can tell the difference between a body that has even a spark of life in it and one that is, when that energy leaves, it's instantaneous, and you can tell there is no life in it. Then it's nothing more than a conglomeration of atoms and molecules, and it begins to decompose immediately. So those are gone right away, and then we have still astral energy. People say, well, wouldn't you be conscious in your astral body? Well, let's take a look at this, because this is a very important question to consider. When you go to sleep at night, usually you have, first of all, a period of complete unconsciousness. Generally, that's the pattern. You fall into a pretty deep sleep, usually right away. I mean, different people have different patterns, but this is the most common, is a deep sleep. And then only after a period of time, and it may be 2-3 hours or longer, you kind of come back up slightly into consciousness and into the dream state. So what is in that dream state? How much consciousness do you have? Are you able to decide where you're going and what you're doing and who you're going to interact with? Not usually. It's usually just kind of this very strange movie that you're watching, isn't it? And it just kind of goes on its own and you're just kind of a spectator. And even then, trying to perceive and remember that. How many of you have tried to remember a dream and you really focus on it, but within minutes after you wake up, you can only remember just tiny fragments of it. And even then, you have to really make an effort to do that. That's how evanescent, what is the word? Fleeting it is. it just kind of fades like a mist. And so that's not unlike this experience that we have in the Kamaloka, where we have all of the astral energy, all of the emotional energy that was not resolved. That's why I brought up these two diverging examples of the approach to death. The one who organized everything, got everything set up, released any obligations, that's the person who will have a very short period in Kamaloka. It can actually be as short as a few minutes, according to the Mahatmas, if that person is very advanced and has very few unresolved emotional issues in their life. It can be minutes or hours. But in the case of a person who has accumulated an enormous amount of unresolved energy on the astral level, it can take years, maybe 25, 30 years, for that energy to dissipate. Energy does not just immediately change into something of a different quality. Now, you can change between matter and energy, but you can't take angry energy and just turn a switch somewhere and switch that into kindness or something that is less damaging than anger. It has its quality, and that energy has to dissipate. One of the best things that we learned from the masters is that every thought you think attracts an elemental of the same quality as the energy that you put into that thought. So if you think an angry thought, that automatically and immediately is taken up by an elemental, which is life energy, a life form, and encapsulated. That's why we talk about thought forms and that thoughts are things. They really are. They're actually something that, if you're sensitive enough, you can see them. We see things on other levels in different ways. Sometimes we just feel them, we sense them. Anyone who's the least bit sensitive can do that. Some people actually see them as colors and forms. Others perceive them as kind of more like a sound or a musical tone or something of that nature. So on these higher realms, it just depends on how you choose or what your constitution is as to how you perceive it. In the physical body, we don't have much choice. We have to see with our eyes, we have to hear with our ears, we have to touch with our hands or other parts of our nervous system. But in the other realms, it's different. You don't have just an eye see. You can see with any part of your body. I've heard of people who were blind and who could actually feel colors through their hands. You could put a red sheet of paper and they could tell the vibrational level was different from a blue sheet of paper. So, in a sense, they were seeing with their hands. We can do the same thing, but it takes a lot of work to learn that. So in the Kamaloka, what happens is the dissipation of all of the unresolved emotional energy. So you can imagine, I think, that you want to make this period as short as possible. It can actually be a nightmare period. It can be a period where if you're the type of person who is almost afraid to fall asleep at night because you have a tendency to get nightmares, your Kamaloka period probably is going to reflect that too. You will probably have a bit of a nightmare period. Most people don't have nightmares, so to speak, but you know, some dreams are more pleasant than others, aren't they? Have any of you ever had a dream where there was something frightening? You know, you dreamed about a murder or something, or someone was trying to kill you. I used to have those dreams, but I don't anymore. It's been quite a while since I've had a dream where I woke up and kind of in a state of emotional agitation. So it all depends on your everyday life as to what your dreams are, and as to, at the end of your life, what your Kamaloka period will be like, the quality of it. So, the very first thing that happens after the death of the physical body is the consciousness falling into unconsciousness. It's very much like sleep in one sense. You become unconscious. However, I will point out that the first couple of days after death, there's almost like a little window sometimes where some people can perceive the individual who has gone. There are many stories of the person who died appearing either at the moment of death or soon after to loved ones who were far away, or even appearing a night or two later to people who were close to them. Or people will see them in dream states sometimes. So there's kind of like a very short window where there's like a little bit of opportunity once in a while to have a little communication with that individual, but then generally that closes off and they fall into a very deep unconscious state. Then they reawaken in this Kamaloka state, which is not really conscious, it's only semi-conscious. And then they have the dreams, and as I said, that can last until all of that energy just dissipates and resolves on its own. And then again, they fall into this cycle of unconsciousness, semi-consciousness, and then as that energy is dropping off, they drop back down again into unconsciousness. Then there's something that occurs that is very peculiar, and they call it the struggle between the higher self and the lower self. If there's anything that could actually be called a last judgment, it would be this struggle. And the Mahatmas point out that it is really a struggle between your higher mental connected with Buddhi and Atma. So the sixth and seventh principles, as they numbered them at that time, and they are against the lower ones. It's like a tug of war as to which one is going to gain control of resources of that lifetime, so to speak. Almost always it's the higher part of your nature that wins out. And the only time the lower part would win out is in the case of a really evil person, one that had no redeeming qualities whatsoever during their lifetime. And this, who knows, it might be a psychopath or someone who has been an agent of karma during the lifetime, but just honestly did nothing out of kindness for anyone. That person would be what is called, they refer to as a torn out page, that personality, that lifetime. And so the higher self discards the entire lifetime. And it's not even recognized as one of the lifetimes in that series. It loses the connection completely with the higher self. So the individual, meaning the personality, is basically without the soul. So it still has some existence that it has to go through. And if there's any sort of purgatory or hell after life, it would be that. It would be that personality that really has lost the ability to continue on. And it will exist at that level of consciousness, very low, until it dissipates. So it is possible to lose your soul, so to speak. But in truth, it's not personality losing the soul, but the soul decides that that lifetime had no redeeming qualities to it, and they let it go. So the masters refer to that as a torn out page in the series of lifetimes. Very interesting choice of terms. All right, so it gets a little involved, but I'm hoping you're picking up, getting some ideas of this, because again, if we understand the process of death, then it helps us to understand life. So this struggle takes place, and in almost every case, the higher self wins out. Then we have what is called Devachan. Now, I'm going to refer to Paul. He's the expert on Devachan. And then after we talk about Devachan for a few minutes, we're going to talk about a few exceptions throughout this period. And then we're going to open it up for some discussion and for some questions and see if we can get some understanding of this whole Bardo concept. Tell us all about Devachan.
He lets me talk about the coolest part of Bardo, which is this idea of Devachan. And actually, we should probably write that up here. Let's write here, Devachan. Okay, it's a Tibetan word that basically translates to the dwelling of the gods, and it's conceivable that many of the world's religions have adopted the view of what heaven is from this concept of Devachan. There's also a Sanskrit word that corresponds to this as well. Sukhavati, which translates in English to land of bliss. So we've heard that there are several segments of this after-death state. The first is a relatively unconscious state not too long after the physical body dies. Then there's a partial awakening in the Kamaloka, which is somewhat of a dream state where the astral emotional energy and emotions are dissipated and neutralized, so to speak. Then there's the second phase of relative unconscious sleep, where the soul kind of just drifts back into a state of neutrality. And then there's another partial awakening. It's in this state of consciousness called Devachan. And it doesn't take place in the same plane as the Kamaloka, which was in the astral world. So this is now in the level of where the soul resides, or the higher self, the level of the higher mind, or the higher manas. or where the causal body lives. There are lots of different names for this kind of higher state of consciousness. Devachan is not a physical place. Leadbeater does say that it's a specific place 45 miles above the surface of the earth or something like that, but that's one idea. But the other idea that we're talking about from HPB and the Masters, it's not a physical place, it's a state of consciousness. And it's the land of bliss. It's basically the reward for the altruistic efforts that were put forth in the physical life. So the roller coasters of emotions that were experienced in the physical world are dissipated in the Kamaloka, and then the altruistic, the kind deeds, and the unselfish actions that were done in the physical world are then neutralized and leveled in Devachan. And this is, of course, a very, very pleasant experience, and it's of our own making. It's not necessarily the pearly gates and the anthropomorphic idea of a god and family members and angels playing violins and things. It's a situation that's created to suit our own being. We might be surrounded by the energy of loved ones or the idea of loved ones. It's understanding situations in their entirety, without details, of course. And the time spent in this Devachan, there's no clock time, of course, and we'll talk much more about that this afternoon. But so the idea of time really isn't conceivable at all. But in terms of Earth time, depending on how the life was lived in the physical world previous, that determines how long the time is spent in Devachan. So if the physical existence was lived with an emphasis on altruism and kindness and compassion towards the planet and towards other people, the time at Devachan can be very long in Earth time. Could be hundreds of years, even thousands of years. If a person who was not terribly advanced in spiritual things and lived a rather coarse life and was relatively selfish in nature, would have a very, very short time. And we don't think that every single person even experiences any Devachan. What Terry was just talking about, someone who may have this torn out page wouldn't even have this reward of spending time in the land of bliss. It's said that it's a feeling of intense selfish bliss resulting from unselfish actions in the previous incarnation. And as you can imagine, the majority of human beings do spend a relatively short time in Devachan because the majority of human beings are not terribly advanced on the spiritual path yet, just a stage of human evolution, the evolution of consciousness that we find ourselves in the history of our planet.
Is that it?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. All right.
A.P. Sinnott kind of struggled with this idea of Devachan. He couldn't quite wrap his head around it, and he they sent several letters back and forth, K.H. trying to explain it in terms that he could grasp, but Sinnott never felt really comfortable with it as to how this how unselfish acts could result in this realm of selfish bliss, but it wasn't real. That was his problem, was that it was not a real situation because it's still a dream type of state, but it's just incredibly blissful. And he's like, well, that makes no sense. Why would anyone want to waste time in this state that is not real? And K.H. asked him, well, when you are in a moment when you are in the highest bliss, are you aware of any passage of time? No, of course not. Well, why wouldn't you, and don't you want to prolong that forever? And he, obviously most people are like, yes, of course. When you are in that moment of bliss, it's like you hope that it never ends. Well, then why wouldn't you? And he still couldn't quite grasp it. But one question he had, and it's a very valid one, as Paul pointed out, the more advanced you get, the longer period of the time you spend on Devachan. That means the longer period of time you're not available on Earth to be helping out with the work to be done down here. So, wouldn't you want to just give that up and say, okay, I'm good, you know, I'll just renounce that and come back right away? Well, the answer is that in most cases that's not possible, because it would be for the most part, going against natural law. There's no way that you can just let go of some kind of energy that you've created, as long as it is personal in nature. Only those who have reached the point where all of their actions are 100% altruistic, none of it has any personal attachment whatsoever, would be able to renounce that. Now, I do believe that there are a few exceptions that do occur where the masters would have to interfere and do something with that energy to take it over, because it can't just simply be, you can't just simply walk away from any energy that you create. But I think there are very few exceptions, but for the most part, no. The answer is no, you can't just give that up and say, I'm coming back.
That makes sense, because everything in the universe is always balanced, and it always works out equally.
You probably need that rest when
It's-
you realize
exactly.
that you have to.
And and you're right.
Like going to sleep
As
at
they
night.
point out, there's no sense of time. So if you spend 1,200 years in Devachan and then reincarnate, you won't be aware of the passage of time. But think of it this way: if you wake up in the morning and you've had kind of a restless night, and you still kind of never fully relaxed, you wake up and you don't feel fully rested, do you? And then other times, if you have gone to sleep in a period of deep relaxation and had a very sound sleep, you wake up, you're refreshed, you feel really great. I think it's probably more something along that line, that you're not aware of the passage of time, but you do feel the effects of the amount of time that you spent.
And if you don't get the rest that you need, then that affects what you're going to do next.
Yes,
So
exactly.
you need to.
Exactly. So this Devachan is very interesting, but again, it's not fully conscious. There's more consciousness in that Devachan period than in the Kamaloka period, but it is still more or less a dream state, but kind of like the dream states. Have you ever woken up and you feel that something happened? You just have this energy that you feel that you experience something, but you can't necessarily describe it or reinvent the situation as to what might have occurred, but you feel the effects from it. Okay? Any of you had that experience? I certainly have. And it's not very often, but every once in a while, it's just like, I think something must have happened during the night, because I just feel like full of joy and light, and it does happen. So I think that it's more like that. Now, one question that people ask is, well, can these people in Devachan, since a large part of it is the unconditional love that they shared with family members and friends and just people in general, can't they help out with the problems of their family, for example? And the answer is no. If they were even aware of the problems that family members are going through, that would be end of their Devachan experience. How could they experience absolute bliss and be involved in the everyday problems of their children? So it's a little difficult to explain, but their children are the principal players in this play that is going on in their experience, and yet they're not seeing what is actually happening in those children's physical lives. It has to be that way. So if we are in that state of mind where we can raise our consciousness to their level, you may be able to get a glimpse periodically, either at night during sleep or during deep meditation. you might get just a little bit of a glimpse of one of your loved ones' Devachan experience, but they cannot bring their consciousness down to your everyday life. It's night and day. This points out something very important. And again, I keep coming back to this. If you would understand life, you must understand death, and vice versa. And that is that Devachan is at the very level of the soul. So if you would be in touch with your soul, understand as much as possible what Devachan is like. That absolute bliss, the pure, unconditional love for all beings, not just family members and people you know, but all beings, including animals, plants, everything, the entire planet. That is the natural condition of that level of consciousness, the higher manas, influenced by buddhi and atma. Atma, buddhi, manas. That is the true human being, is that highest part that we can aspire to and that we do attain to during Devachan, the Devachan experience. Let's do that as much as possible on the physical plane. Let's let go of all the resentment, all the anger, all of the intrigues, all of this stuff that creates havoc in our everyday life. Everything that has anything to do with that emotional roller coaster ride that so many people are addicted to. We were talking with Maureen and Nancy last night about eliminating the personality. We decided that most people wouldn't like that term. So let's eliminate the attachment to the personality. Let's eliminate the attachment to that personality. And if we do, then we are much more in tune with our soul, or we have the opportunity, because then we've eliminated the obstacles. The astral energy is symbolized by water, and that's the perfect symbol for the astral plane, because it's very, very fluid. It's very easily molded and influenced. I mean, water can take any form whatsoever. It can be solidified into ice, whatever container you put it in. It holds that, forms that shape. You can put coloring in it and it immediately disperses that coloring through it. So it's very, very malleable. And the other thing is that if it is perfectly still, it can be a reflector for the Buddhic level, but only if it's completely, utterly still. Otherwise, what happens when you've got a body of water that's stirred up by a storm or by stirring? It becomes muddy. If it's perfectly calm, it reflects everything. You can see all the way through it, 100, 150 feet, you can see through it like glass. But if it's disturbed, as is the normal condition in the human being, then it is not a reflector of anything, and we get lost in that. People get lost in this emotional realm. And it's very easy, because if you stir it up, you can't see anything else. And that's why so many people think, well, if I didn't have emotions, I wouldn't even be human. They honestly think that their emotional reactions to things constitute a big part of their being a human. It's not. You're human because of your level of consciousness, not because of your emotional reactions. And the true human exists at the level of the soul, not at the level of your emotional reactions. So as we gain control over our thoughts and over our emotions, we are more in tune with our soul, and we are living kind of in a Devachanic state on a daily basis. Then, if you attain that truly, you are just about that close to becoming an adept yourself. Because they operate on that plane. It has been said that HPV did not have an astral vehicle, an astral body. That she had eliminated that. Now, there's a bit of a mystery because she definitely had some violent emotional reactions, and everyone who lived at that time could verify them. But there was no attachment to it. There was a peculiarity, and we won't go into the speculation as to why it was. But I honestly believe that she did not. I don't think she could have been the instrument of the adepts that she was unless her emotions had been eliminated, unless she had gotten those completely under control. And that really is one of our goals for humanity in general, and for us as Theosophists to help people to recognize that, to let go of that attachment, that addiction to emotions. It's absolutely an addiction. Okay. Let me quickly go over a couple of exceptions, and then we'll answer questions, and then we'll wind things up here. Children. What happens when a child dies? If that child has not reached the age of reason yet, and the age of reason varies a little bit depending on the individual, but it's pretty close to around 7 or 8 years old. If they die within that period, then depending on their karma, they can reincarnate almost immediately. And there's a very important exception. Their astral vehicle and lower mental vehicle do not dissipate like it does in an adult. They are retained, and so if that child reincarnates fairly quickly, which is normal, then they retain the astral and the mental, lower mental bodies, and only the physical and etheric bodies are reconstituted. They may even come back as a member of the same family, or as a neighbor. And this is one of the reasons that we get some of those stories of children who remember past lifetimes. And in some cases, they died as children. And they remember up for a few years, and then those memories kind of fade away after that. So that is good to know, because a lot of people anguished about the incident in Newtown. We actually passed through Newtown a few weeks ago. And a lot of people have really anguished about that. But the children, it's the emotional attachment that we have to things that causes the pain. For the children themselves, they are not aware of that. Children are so adaptable. I have a niece who died very unexpectedly at 39 years old. And she had 5 children from 6 to 18 years old. No, 6 to 16. The father, her husband, remarried after a couple of years. And the younger children had no problem accepting the new mother and just fit in with her children and just almost seamlessly. But the older children really resisted. They didn't adapt well at all to this new family situation. So the younger they are, the more adaptable they are. But they could also carry scars too, emotional scars, if it's an abusive type of thing. But if it's just life in general, they tend to bounce back pretty well. The other exception is accidents and suicides. So, are there such things as accidents in life? I used to say that there are no such things as accidents in life. Well, I had to change my tune because in investigating the Mahatma letters, and as you know, that's one of my favorite books, and I read that thing quite often. The masters say that there actually are such things as accidents, and they can be caused by our own negligence or by the negligence of someone else, or it may even be just, a confluence of energies that cause it. Some people are going to die a violent death based on karmic circumstances. Something in their past created a need to experience a sudden death in this life, whether it's through accident, a car accident, murder, war, etc. So that truly would not actually be an accident, even though it looks like an accident. But then, according to the masters, there are actually cases where if a person Saturday night decides to go out and drink, and then they get in their car and they don't intend to kill anybody, but because they are not in control of their abilities, they swerve into the wrong lane and hit someone head on, and that person gets killed. If it was not that person's karma, then that truly is an accident. And it's kind of tragic in a way, because it really shouldn't have happened. It will all be regulated and evened out in the long run, but in the short run there is definitely an imbalance. Something happened that wasn't supposed to, even karmically. KH says that the Tian Chohans, now we're talking about planetary lords, so he's talking about the Lord of the world actually takes on somehow the care of these individuals who are killed accidentally, and that they will be compensated for this error in life, so to speak, and that everything will come out in the end. It's only a temporary imbalance, but he says that they are protected during this period, because people who die a violent death usually are not at all prepared for it. So they may not have even had time to get things in order, or unless they're living a very pure life. So they do have an extra degree of protection because it wasn't warranted. It wasn't because of their own doing.
Do you think that the opposite is true? That there are times when something was supposed to happen and then didn't?
Good God, I don't know that I've ever thought about that.
The reason I ask is that an astrologer once told me that I was supposed to have died when I was 14, and I didn't. And so this life was like an open playing field for me, because all the karma wasn't attached and all that, which I don't believe that. I don't think that was true. But I just wonder if that can happen that way.
I would have to think about that, but I kind of doubt it too. I think that it's something that is supposed to happen. Everything kind of works that way for a period of time until it actually does occur. So I would tend to say that probably not, but I always keep these things in mind, and then as other things kind of open up, then they either reinforce it or lead me in a different direction. All right, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm wondering, Nancy, if there are possibilities of windows of opportunity, that there might be opportunities at different points in our life for things to happen, and that might have been a situation at age 14 where there was that opportunity, but for whatever reason was not taken.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
And that might explain some of the people who have the near-death experiences. My mother being one of them, who saw all kinds of things, which I won't go into, but and then decided, no, it wasn't time yet. She didn't want to go yet, and came back, and then died like 14 years later.
And I think it's also true, and this I do believe, is that your astrological charts, other things, can be read on different levels. You can read it on just a purely physical level, which this is what you're going to do this time, or a more emotional, and then a spiritual level.
I think as you know, I studied astrology, and Nancy did too. I came to the conclusion that the astrology as known in the world today is lacking. That originally, several thousand years ago, it it had more substance to it and was more meaningful, but over time things have changed and we didn't have anyone who was insightful enough to reinterpret it, so to speak. I think the field is wide open for any of the adepts who have the time and inclination to do it, to kind of bring a new understanding of astrology to us. And that when that occurs, then we will have a better opportunity to learn again. I think it was much more meaningful at some point in the past, that everything has changed to a point where it's kind of fallen apart and needs to be reinterpreted again at this point. But so far we don't have the people who are advanced enough to do that, but it will happen in the future, I believe. Suicides, we need to just touch on that. Suicides fall into two categories. The person who plans it consciously and executes their own death. And this is really a tragic situation, because that is one of the situations where they don't really lose consciousness completely after death. And that's the saddest part about it, is that this person is so tortured emotionally and mentally that they feel that they have no other way out and that this will be a release. It's not. It's not. It doesn't work that way. They die and they are still, they're in the Kamaloka, but they're much more conscious than the average person. And for them, it truly is a nightmare, because here they thought that they were going to get rid of all of this difficulty, and it's still with them. They haven't eliminated anything. There's an even worse thing, and that is those people, because they are somewhat conscious, often will contact mediums or people who have a weak constitution, and in order to re-experience physical life, the physical body. If they happen to be addicted to drugs or alcohol, they're craving that connection again. And they will find someone who also is connected, who has that addiction. And if they're weak enough, they will get into their psyche, and these people can actually create new karma because of that connection, either through a medium or through a weak person that they kind of obsess, or possess, I should say, that they possess. So this, again, is a tragic consequence of the suicide victim who dies in full consciousness, doing it consciously.
So they're creating karma after death?
They can.
Wow, that's...
They can. This is an exception to the rule. The other one is the suicide victim who does so because of a moment of insanity. And the KH points out very clearly that that person is not responsible. You know, if truly it was an this person was not in control of his or her faculties and committed suicide in a moment of insanity, true insanity, then they would not fall into that same category. They do fall into the category of the victim, though. It wasn't supposed to happen. So they actually end up being the same as the victim of an accident. So several different little scenarios that you have to keep in mind as Theosophists that are exceptions to the rule. But we now know kind of the general pattern, a few of the exceptions, and hopefully have a little better understanding of what to expect ourselves, which is helpful, I think.
I'm sorry, but what did you say had to do with the victim of an accident?
They are protected to some extent because, as I said, normally anyone who is caught off guard and had no time to prepare, and especially if it's a young person, usually is filled with emotional energy. And so that can create a very difficult time in the Kamaloka. And they're still going to experience some difficulties. but they're given some additional help through the Dian Chohans to deal with that somehow. They make this very short statement, don't clarify it or anything, but it just basically says that they are under the protection of the Dian Chohans. So they are protected a little bit. Skandhas and karma. You've all heard of skandhas. And even in the Mahatma letters, they sometimes kind of use the two terms interchangeably, skandhas and karma. But there is a very subtle difference. Karma is personally what you have created over the different lifetimes, and I think we'll probably have you give a little bit about karma this afternoon. And skandhas are is the general pattern that you carry with you. So at the end of life, your life ends because the energy winds down. There's not enough energy anymore to sustain a physical body. But after this period of rest, and especially during Devachan, these skandhas, this feeling this need to re-experience, to experience life again, to experience this physical world again, keeps growing. So as the Devachan experience winds down, this need to experience again winds up. So it's kind of like at the beginning of the secret doctrine, after the long pralaya, this need to manifest again shows up, and it just kind of grows, and it can't help but manifest. The only way to overcome that, obviously, is once you have no need for that anymore, for any physical manifestation. Then, at that point, you really have graduated from the human kingdom. All right, just a few more questions.
I have one about suicide. If intention is important, then what about the suicide who ends his or her life in order to prevent additional stress and problems for a family or a mate or something?
It is still selfish, because it's about I don't want to feel guilty about it. If it's in full consciousness, I know a person, for example, who committed mail fraud and was sentenced to prison, and he knew he was going to be taken away from his family, and he had young children for a number of years, and then he had not provided for them, but he did have a $1 million insurance policy, and he decided to commit suicide to prevent them from having financial hardship, and he did. But it is still suicide, and he will still reap the same karmic rewards as any other person who committed suicide. You, as an individual, do not have any more right to kill your own body than to kill anyone else. And in fact, I think it's even worse of a crime to kill yourself than to kill another person. Normally, at another person, it's out of a fit of anger or something like that. But to kill yourself, it's almost always a premeditated process, and there's generally a lot more thought that goes to it. So I'm trying to think of a way, if there's any. I suppose that if you not necessarily committed suicide, but if you if you threw yourself in front of a car in order to protect somebody else, then that's not suicide. No, that I wouldn't consider suicide at all. It would have to be completely unselfish. That's what I'm getting at. And even if you think, well, I don't want to cause problems for my family, it's still selfish, because it's your ego that says I don't want to be a burden to anyone. Well, it may be that their karma and your karma that they are supposed to take care of. So you may be interfering with karma when you do that. So you would have to make sure that there's absolutely nothing personal personal desire.
So I was had a teacher that said if somebody commits suicide intentionally, that they're going to have to reincarnate with the same life lessons all over again.
Yeah, that's one of those tales that has gone around for years and years and years, and
Kind of makes sense in a way.
they kind of make it sound like they're going to have to go through exactly the same processes that they've already covered right up to that point, and then pick up but you can't recreate it ever exactly the way it was. So yes, they still have to. They have an amount of karma that was not
Same kind of lessons,
resolved.
but not the same kind of life.
Yeah.
Well,
So
that's what I meant, yeah.
we have to kind of re-examine those things carefully, because there's a little kernel of truth to them, but they're sometimes oversimplified.
But do they linger around the earth in a chaotic state for a while?
Yes, those are the ones again who can actually appear. Most mediums, and I speak from personal experience, are not in contact with a conscious entity. They're in contact with an energy that does have some memory of the person's life. And they're convinced that they're absolutely in touch with that individual, but it's not. It's like a shell. It's the cast-off remnants of that individual that still retains certain vibrations and certain memory patterns. If you listen to these messages from mediums, they all tell you the same thing. Aunt Mary wants you to know that she's perfect, that she's fine, that she's happy, everything's okay, and she loves you. Well, okay, I knew that. But it's what almost every single medium tells you. I had one even at Alcott, a lady, a woman there who was kind of a medium, and she's telling me, your mother is here, and she's telling you she loves you. And I'm like, okay, whatever. I didn't really say anything, but no, I really investigated spiritualism to see what it was about. And I have to agree with HPB and the Masters, and they were very adamant about the fact that there's nothing at all helpful in contacting what they think of as dead spirits. It's an illusion for one thing, and it's not really helpful. And if they did contact an actual entity being, which is normally a suicide or an accident victim, then they can actually interfere with their karma and with their after-death state. So even as a survivor, it's best not to try to contact any individuals through a medium. If you want to contact somebody, go into deep meditation and try to contact them in Devachan if that's where you think they are. But don't try to bring them down to your level. This is kind of heavy stuff, but I think it's important to talk about it. Yes?
In some of the Theosophical literature on Devachan, and I don't know if it's Leadbeater or the Masters, they say that it's not just a realm of rest and bliss, but that you spend the time developing the qualities that from the experiences you had while you were alive, and you develop these into powers and abilities for your next life. Does that ring the bell?
I think what you're referring to is actually from the KH. And they're talking, if I'm talking about the same thing, they're talking about that if an artist, for example, a musician who is in Devachan and his absolute love in life was music, that he creates in this matter that is much more rarefied, these incredible melodies, and that for over and over just creates, has at his disposal every instrument possible, and that's his Devachan experience. So I don't know if it's actually increasing in experience so much as it is being relieved of being able to use the same type of instruments, but on a much higher plane. That are much more malleable. Just just with the imagination. Of course, every artist creates in his own mind. Every symphony, everything, every painting, anything that was created has to be created in a mind first. There has to be a thought first. Nothing is created without that thought. So that's, I believe, what you're talking about.
Well, I can't quite remember where I read it or what exactly the details were, and that's why I asked. I just wondered if it was something that Leadbeater had said, or did Blavatsky and the Masters say it?
Our true experience as humans occurs here in
Right.
this lifetime. What our goal is to try to match that as closely as possible to the vibrations of the level of the soul. This absolute bliss, universal love, kindness, compassion. There aren't a whole lot of adjectives we have to even describe it. You have to just experience it yourself, because it's literally undescribable. Indescribable. To finish up here, I wanted to share with you, and you all know this, I know you're all familiar with this, but you were looking at it last night. One of my favorite writings of HPV was found right at the very end of her life. In fact, there's no mention of it while she was alive, and it was found in her desk and among her papers after she died. No one knows when she wrote it or what she planned to do with it. But to me, it's one of the greatest things that she ever wrote. And it says, "There is a road, steep and thorny, beset with perils of every kind, but yet a road. And it leads to the very heart of the universe. I can tell you how to find those who will show you the secret gateway that opens inward only and closes fast behind the neophyte forevermore. There is no danger that dauntless courage cannot conquer. There is no trial that spotless purity cannot pass through. There is no difficulty that strong intellect cannot surmount. For those who win onwards, there is reward past all telling, the power to bless and save humanity. For those who fail, there are other lives in which success may come." Now, is she not describing the path to becoming an adept? Those who have the power to bless and save humanity, isn't that an adept? I think so. So she's telling us, if that's what you want to do, tell me how to find the people who can help you do that. But you have to have three qualities. What were the qualities? Dauntless courage, spotless purity, and strong intellect. Well, it just so happens that Paul and I wrote a book. And at the very beginning of this book is this quote by HPV, and because we felt it was so important, it is the overriding theme of the book. How do you implement those three qualities? How do you develop those three qualities? And really, what do you have to do of a practical nature to make some serious progress towards becoming an adept? So we called it Ancient Wisdom for a New Age, a practical guide for spiritual growth. And don't be intimidated by the size of it. It's large print, and it's very easy to read. And it has a glossary at the back of it, which a lot of people like. So you're welcome to, we have a few copies for sale. And it's actually in hardcover and in softcover. If you want to take a look at it and see if you're interested. I also have some little cards that I'll put out that you can take with you. And it's available everywhere, Amazon and Barnes & Noble. We have our own website. It's on ebook. All of the ebooks are $2.99 in all versions. And we have a person, a friend in Puerto Rico, who is translating it into Spanish, and that should be done fairly soon. He actually offered to translate it even before we started writing the book, when it was just an idea. He says, I'll translate it for you. And he has been absolutely serious, and he's almost finished with it now. It's taken a lot of work on his part. So anyway, if you're interested in that, take a look at it. The New York Theosophical group is doing a study course on it. Paul and I were there in January and helped Lynn Trotman get started on her course there, and she's got a group of people who are covering one chapter a week very, very rapidly. So she's keeping us busy because we send her an outline every week for the chapter she's going to cover. They're up to chapter 6 already. All right, so I think that will do it until this afternoon.
All right, thank you so much.